Hi everyone, my name is Emilio Alvarez. I am the Director of Campus Ministry here at Viterbo University, and thank you for joining us for this virtual event. Today we have the privilege of inviting Dr. David Saunders-Scott, Associate Professor of Psychology here to the institution, also co-chair of the Social Justice and Equity Committee. And in his journey from his home in Jamaica to his higher education journey in the United States, he has a very distinct and unique perspective to share with all of us. So Dr. David Saunders-Scott, thank you so much for being a part of our community, and thank you so much for being willing to share more about the work that you're doing here at Viterbo University. And with that, everyone, please enjoy. Thanks.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I mean, I really appreciate it, and looking forward to good conversations and responding to the students' question. So what I really wanted to talk about was, why I care about racial and social justice and equity, and why that is a value that I hold dear, and also why I am motivated to advocate for racial and social justice and equity. And so I kind of want to start off with I think a very unusual question, which is, what was my race when I lived in Jamaica? Because I think it's a really good way to start having this conversation about race and how my thoughts about race, as well as racism, changed over the years, living in Jamaica and coming to the US and seeing the differences between Jamaica and the US, as well as I said, how my assumptions have evolved over the time. So this is a question that I would actually pose to students, and since students are not here, I'll just say, for the students who will watch eventually, think about it for a moment, right? I know that's a very strange question because when you look at my skin complexion, it is dark, and most people assume that I am black because my skin complexion is dark. And so I just want to share a story with you, and the reason that I'm even asking this question is that when I came to the US for the first time to live, I mean, I'd come here before to visit. My uncles and aunts and cousins live in New York and New Jersey, so I'd visited them before over the summer for summer vacation, but never really lived here. And when you live in New York or you visit New York, it's kind of like being in the Caribbean because you're surrounded by so many Jamaicans and all the people from the Caribbean. So the first time I lived here was when I came here for school, came here for college, and I went to college in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so I remember being on campus my first week of the school year and having to fill out forms, and even after that filling out forms, and on the forms there were questions asking about my demographic information. And I looked at the question of race, ethnicity, and I would say, I didn't see myself, I'm not seeing myself on this form. Like, what are they really asking me? There was African American, and I'm like, well, I didn't grow up in this country, I'm not African American. There was black, and I look at my skin, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of a dark chocolate brown, but black, not really, right? And there was no age, I'm not Asian, I'm not Native American or Pacific Islander. And then there was the other category, and I would always check the other category, and then the line writes Jamaican of African Caribbean descent. So I never identified as black. And I thought about this even recently as I was thinking more about race and racism. And several weeks ago, I called my mom up because I was like, well, is this something that I'm just making up? Is this just a figment of my imagination? So I called my mom up in Jamaica and I said, Mommy, we say mommy in Jamaica, we don't say mom. So it might sound really kind of strange coming from a grown man say mommy, but we say mommy. So I'm going to keep it real. So I said, Mommy, I have a really funny question for you. Bear with me. What was my race in Jamaica? And she just kind of giggled, and there was a long pause. And in her very, very patient and wise way, she said, well, David, asking about race in Jamaica is like asking about the seasons here. We don't have seasons in Jamaica. It's usually hot or warm, and we don't have races in Jamaica. And then after another pause, she said, in a very wise and loving way, she said, remember, David, that the Jamaican national motto is, out of many, one people. We are the descendants of multiple people, of diverse people. We don't have races here in Jamaica. So I'm starting off this way because I'm trying to emphasize something here. This is my own information, anecdotal evidence, but the science is also clear in this. Right? There's no doubt about this. This is information that came out of the Human Genome Project, Decoding the Book of Life. And this was shared in the White House by, I think, Bill Clinton at the time. It was in 2000 when they decoded this Book of Life, as it's called, or was called. And what they actually discovered was that, and what he said, that what is true is that in genetic terms, all human beings are more than 99.9% the same, regardless of race. Not about, not less than, but more than 99% the same, regardless of race. And in fact, there is greater genetic similarity across groups than within groups. So to make this more concrete, one way to think about it is that there is a high likelihood that there is a greater genetic similarity between, let's say, me, someone with my dark complexion, and you, Kyle, someone with a lighter complexion, right? We have a different level of melanin in our skin. But there is actually a very high likelihood that there's a greater genetic similarity between me and you than between me and another black person from Jamaica, right? Quote unquote black person from Jamaica, or between you and another person with your complexion here in La Crosse. And what we do know is that there is a much greater genetic diversity within groups, within the groups of people labeled as white, within the group of people labeled as Asian or blacks than across groups. What we do know for a fact is that the group with the greatest genetic diversity are the people who live in sub-Saharan Africa, the people with really dark skin, dark complexion. So I'm saying that to say that race is really just a social construct with no biological basis. There's no scientific basis for race, right? And I don't want people to get me wrong here. Of course, genes or biology code for skin complexion, right? In as much as genes or biology code for eye color or hair color, right? It's the same thing. It's melanin that codes for the dark color of a person's eye or the dark color of a person's hair. But we don't categorize or separate people into different groups based on the color of their hair or the color of their eye. I mean, we could do that really. We could say, well, you guys over here belong to a group of brown eye race of people or hazel eye or green eye race of people. And you guys over here belong to a redhead or red hair race of people, blonde hair race of people, a black hair race of people, that sort of thing, right? But we don't do that. So race is really a social construct with no biological, no genetic basis. But race is real, right? I know this is really confusing sometimes because I'm saying here that race is real. Race is real because it was invented by society. So race is a real social construct because it has social and political implications, right? So it's real socially, it's real politically, because we can actually predict things like a person's health outcome, we can predict a person's wealth distribution, we can predict things like a person's educational attainment based on different racial groups that they're in. So in that sense, race is real socially, politically, but biologically race is not real. And so I would argue really that there's no need for race, or there would be no need for race if there was no racism. It wasn't always this way. Obviously, we could always have recognized the differences between people. I mean, that's something that we know. We can see differences among one another, but we don't have to classify people based on these differences. And I would even argue that racism came before racism preceded race. Right? People were oppressed, people were subjugated, people were enslaved, and then to justify the enslavement, the oppression, the subjugation, race was created as a sort of hierarchy or a caste system. So one group, obviously the group that created race, was always at the top, right? We know which group that is. And then below that, there were people classified as Mongoloid and then Negroids, and then now we call those individuals Asians and black, right? At the bottom of the hierarchy or this caste system. And so it was not always that way. As I said before, people could have always seen differences, and we will always see differences among one another. Body shape, size, type, hair color, eye color. We will always see differences, but we don't always have to have race. And I think if we can actually dismantle or eliminate racism, we can get rid of race eventually, because it was not always this way, so it doesn't always have to be that way in the future. But we can't put the cart before the horse, right? We still have to address the problems in society before we can be in a sort of post-racial society. We have to get rid of racism first. We have to work to dismantle racism. And as I said, I'm very hopeful that we can, because as I've mentioned, and I just want to reiterate what I just said earlier, is that it was not always this way. Obviously, people were always seen differently, right? But people were not always classified and subjugated based on differences in their skin complexion. So I want to share one more story, right? Again, of my experience when I just came here for school. I remember my first, I think this was the first semester. I'm not quite sure if it was the first or second week of the semester, but I was invited by these African-American students, my friend and I, who's now my best friend. He's from Sierra Leone, West Africa, so we had very similar experiences. Growing up in Jamaica, I remember just meeting him and him singing some of the dancehall reggae songs that I grew up listening to, and I was like, I can't believe you know all the words to this song. So we had very, very similar experiences in a lot of ways. So we were invited by these African-American students to their student-led organization. It was called the Black Liberation Affairs Committee, or BLAC for short. And they were talking about the things that they had experienced: discrimination, the hostility that they had experienced, microaggression, although at the time, I did not know that this was microaggression. And I was thinking, and my friend and I were talking about this afterwards, but I was thinking like, I did not have this experience. I don't think I was never hated because of the color of my skin. I was never discriminated because of the color of my skin. And it's not like Jamaica doesn't have problems. I mean, we have problems with sexism, with heterosexism, with classism, with homophobia. So it's not that Jamaica doesn't have issues, but as far as race and racism is concerned, this was not an issue that I ever had to deal with growing up in Jamaica, because people were not categorized based on the complexion of their skin. So I just never had this experience of being hated or despised because of the color of my skin, and neither did my friend. So after that meeting, we were looking at each other and saying, what are these students complaining about? What do they have to complain about? They're in this wonderful country with all of these resources, so many privileges at their fingertips. They just need to pull themselves up by the bootstrap, buckle down, and get their work done, because there's nothing to complain about. So complete racist idea. And I'm talking about it right now, it just kind of makes me cringe to think that I even thought that. Like, I had these ideas, completely dismissing and disregarding what the students were saying, disregarding their experiences. And I can relate to that when I hear people talking about some of the things that they say when they talk about people and their experiences without really understanding, because I was at that place as well where I just did not understand what they were talking about. It just didn't make any sense to me, because again, I came here from Jamaica where things are hard. It feels like people are always struggling to make ends meet and that sort of thing. And in a country where they had all of this information and resources. And so my friend and I were saying, what are these students complaining about? Isn't racism a thing of the past? Had this kind of apathy towards racism. And I said, my friend and I were saying, the KKK was from a long time ago. People are not burning crosses on people's lawn anymore. That is a thing of the past. And then I was in for a rude awakening, because 3 years after being in college, I remember that there was news about the KKK Klan rally in St. Paul, Minnesota, like literally on the steps of the Capitol, 3 years after I was in college. And I remember this very well because I was on campus working in the athletics department at the time. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, I thought these guys were extinct. What's going on here? Like, this was crazy. And recently I was thinking back to that time, and I was saying, well, was that a figment of my imagination? Did that really happen? And so I found a newspaper article that I'll just quickly pull up here. And just an excerpt that says, 46 men dressed in hooded white robes or brown shirts with swastika armbands stood defiantly on the steps of the state capitol, waving Nazi and Confederate flags. The members of the National Knights of the Ku Klux Klan and the National Socialist Movement took turns blasting various racial groups and calling for a pure white race. Michael McQueenie, a Grand Dragon of the KKK from Wisconsin, and the rally organizers set the tone of intolerance. So that really did happen. It wasn't just my memory. And so this was something that was kind of a shock for me, completely taken aback. And so I started to realize, well, what these students were saying was actually true. Their experiences were valid. It's not, I couldn't relate to it because I didn't have it, but they were absolutely true. And people might say, well, this was, back in the day, probably because this was 2001, or maybe that this is a different time, different era, but it still happens. I would say it still happens today. And What I want to also say is that, honestly, I have never, as far as I can tell, I've never experienced blatant discrimination. I don't remember a time that I've ever experienced blatant discrimination. But I know for a fact that racism is still a problem. And it's a problem that is preventing this country from being what it is fully capable of becoming. And we can see the catalog of oppression, of discrimination, of hate throughout the years, from past to present. And the present is influenced by the past. And so if we don't understand what has happened in the past, we can't really address the present fully. So when we look at history, what we find is that, and this is not any news to anyone, it's a matter of historical record, it's a historical fact, that there was more than 240 years where people were actually enslaved in this country, 246 years of slavery from 1619 to 1865. And I think some people say, and including myself at one point would say, how could people have stood by and let this happen, right? But then after slavery ended, there was a brief period, it's called Reconstruction, where people actually were doing well, especially black people were doing very well in this country. And they were flourishing, they were thriving. They had businesses for about 11 years, from about 1866 to 1877. But during that time and after that time, there was Jim Crow laws that really continued to oppress people. And there was equal, or separate but equal, or so-called equal. And then from the 50s, 60s, fighting for civil rights. So 103 years of separate but equal and fighting for civil rights. I just want to pose one question. I wasn't going to do this, but I want to just pose a question that James Baldwin posed, which Malcolm X actually posed before. And he said, if people are really citizens of this country, why do they have to fight for their civil rights? And I think it's something that really resonates with me, because it's true, because people had to fight for their civil rights in the 50s and 60s. But then after that, of course, after voting rights and things were approved, there was this immediate or intense backlash to the civil rights movement and the efforts of the civil rights for voting rights. And then from 68 or 70 to 2020, there was this dramatic increase in the rate of mass incarceration. So that question of how could people have stood by and let this happen, well, it is still happening today, and I think we're still standing by and letting it happen. There's a sort of moral apathy, because right now in prisons, there are more people incarcerated, there are more people in prisons today than there were people enslaved during the time of slavery. Think about that for a moment. More people in prisons today than there were people enslaved during the time of slavery. And people might be saying, well, the US is more populous. There's more people in the US today than in the past. But there are other countries like China or India that have a hell of a lot more people than the US, and their prison population is not nearly as high as the US. So it's not about the population at all. There's something else going on. And in case people are saying, well, not in my backyard, this doesn't happen in La Crosse, well, that is not true. This was only about a little bit more than a year ago, where someone actually spray painted this racial slur, sand N-word mic, on the building, on the wall of a Muslim-owned business, about a mile away from here, literally a mile away from here. And then to be fair, on the bright side, people in La Crosse really did come out. They really rallied around this Muslim person to say that we don't condone this, we really support you, we love you, you're a neighbor, and they really denounced this. So I'm saying that to say that when it is written on the wall, everyone can see as they're walking by, as they're driving by. It's like a slap in the face. You can't ignore it. But when it is written in the policy, we have this sort of moral apathy. We don't see it, we don't care about it, we don't go looking for it. I think ignorance is bliss, really. I don't mean to use that cliche, but it's true, right? It is harder to learn about something and ignore it than to know that it is there and ignore it. And so when it is literally written on the wall, we can't ignore it, and we cry out, we speak out against it, and we support the person. There's a sort of anti-racism that happens when it is obvious for everyone to see. And the word anti-racism, I know it's a bit of a buzzword, but it has been around for a while. I think it's Angela Davis who said, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. We have to be actively against racism. Whether or not it is written on the wall for everyone to see or not, even if it is written in the policies, we have to do some investigation. We have to say, well, why is it that one group of people are actually experiencing these things when another group of people is not experiencing these things? And if we really believe that all people, regardless of race, are more than 99.9% the same, then it is not the person, it is not the group. Something must be going on in society that is actually disenfranchising some people versus someone else. And so we need to not have this sort of moral apathy when people in a society are being hurt by certain policies. So I'm no longer oblivious, I cannot deny it, and I do not want to pretend, right? This is not my normal, comfortable space. I don't like speaking out, I don't like talking about these things. But I look around and I'm like, no one else is saying these things. Someone needs to say something about it. And this is the reason, in case you're wondering, like I said at the beginning, I really wanted to talk about why I care about social justice and equity. And it's because of this. This is Dorothy Counts, the age of 15, enduring taunting as she was trying to go to school. As a 15-year-old, dark-skinned girl trying to go to school in North Carolina. Her dress soaked with spit because they were spitting on her as well and saying all these horrible things to her as she was just trying to go to school. This continued over the course of 4 days. And one thing I want to say here is that I don't know why they didn't see their sister in this person. Because when I look at her, I see my sister. When I look at her, I see my daughter. My daughter is 9 years old right now. I see my daughter in her. I see my mother. I see my aunt. So why didn't they see her as a family member? What's going on here? Did they know that in genetic terms, all human beings, regardless of race, are more than 99.9% the same? Did they know that? I doubt that, because they did not see their sister, their daughter, potential spouse, and this beautiful dark-skinned girl as she was trying to go to school. As I said, it continued over 4 days to the point where her parents decided to pull her out of school because of the verbal, emotional abuse, the threat that she was experiencing. And they pulled her out of school. At the time, James Baldwin was in France writing. I think he was just trying to get away from the strife of being a black person in America. And as he was in France, he saw this picture. It was 1957 as well. He saw this picture, and I think he must have wondered, like, why am I here when there's work to be done in America? It broke his heart, and he wrote this when he saw the image. It made me furious. It filled me with both hate and pity, and it made me ashamed. Some one of us should have been there with her, right? And that's what I think too. Like, some one of us should have been there with her. And people might be saying, well, this happened a long time ago, David. You're always digging up the past. Why can't you let bygones be bygones, right? We need to move on. We need to forget about the past and just come together, love one another, which is true. We do need to do all of those things, but it's not so long ago. This was actually about 3 years ago, and I think a lot of people know about this, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, August 12, 2017. Again, just like occurred in 2001, 16 years ago when I was in college, the swastika side by side with the Confederate flag. And everyone knows that the swastika is a symbol of genocide, the Confederate flag a symbol of terrorism, oppression, racism. It's not ambiguous, everyone knows it. It's very clear. On that same day, as many people know, a white supremacist plowed his car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters, people who were counter-protesting the hate and discrimination, on that day killing Heather, who was 32 years old. And that breaks my heart, because I'm like, my sister got killed. And I'm thinking, some one of us should have been there with her. Some one of us should have been there a long time ago to dismantle the racism that killed her, right? And that's what I think about. That's why I care about race. That's why I care about social justice and equity. I think about that echoes in my mind. Some one of us need to be there for women most likely to die from pregnancy complications. And if you look at the CDC website, these women are mostly Black and Native women. People most likely to be incarcerated. There is research from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, their think tank, I think it's called COWS for short. I don't know why they came up with that word. It's a COWS. And they found that here in Wisconsin, that there are 11.5 times more Black people in prison than white. And data from several years ago indicated that there was about 220 or so white folks incarcerated compared to more than 2,500 black and brown men. So if we really believe that we are more than 99.9% the same, what is actually going on here? One group of people doesn't have any sort of innate deficiency or moral weakness that would actually cause this to happen if we are the same. What about this? One of us need to be there for people unarmed, most likely to be killed by the police. And again, we know what group that is. People most likely to be infected and die from COVID-19. And we also know about those statistics as well. People making only $7.25 an hour in a country that is this wealthy, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King asked for and wrote about in Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. He really emphasizes that in this country that is so wealthy, if only some people would be willing to get wealthier at a slower rate, we could all do better. And the minimum wage shouldn't be this low. I think it could be at least $15 an hour. People do not have to live in poverty and be struggling to make ends meet in a country that is this wealthy. Some one of us need to be there for people without any or adequate health care. Some one of us need to be there for people who are homeless. Some one of us need to be there for anyone experiencing any form of discrimination for any reason, because of their race, ethnicity, because of their gender identity, because of their sexual orientation, because of their immigration status, because of their cultural differences, because of being differently abled. Some one of us need to be there for people who are being abused, for our family members who are being hurt in society because of the policies that are in place. So I really, really believe that if everyone embraced the fact that we are a family regardless of our differences, that it would be so much easier to fight for and promote racial and social justice and equity if we really embrace and believe that in genetic terms, again, all human beings, regardless of race, are more than 99.9% the same. Then when we see someone who is hurt, someone who is in pain, even if that person doesn't look like we do, same skin complexion, same cultural belief, if they love differently, we still see a family member in that person. And when a family member is in pain, we empathize and we are in pain as well, because we can't stand to see a family member getting hurt, right? And the same is true if we truly believe that we are more than 99.9% the same. Then when we look at these disparities, we know that nothing is inherently wrong with any group of people. And everything is wrong with the policies and practices that hurt people in a society. And if we truly accept and internalize and believe that, then we would be we would be motivated to identify and fight to change harmful policies and practices in our spaces, at work, at school, at home, in our neighborhoods. When someone does or says something that is harmful or offensive or discriminatory, we're going to speak out. We're going to be looking for policies that hurt people. We're going to say, why are some people disenfranchised in society when other people are doing so well? And I would say that we have to be more than just being anti-racist. We have to be for something. We have to be for policies that uplift people, the policies that promote human rights and dignity, policies that promote human health and well-being. We have to be for something. And so it's not just about being anti any bad thing, but it's also being for something. We have to be advocating for policies that protect people. And so I want to end by saying one thing. I know that you probably you weren't expecting a long presentation, so I'm going to end by just saying here that in this work, I really believe that self-care is important. I mean, I've found that, and I mean, maybe one of the blessings is that I have training as a clinical psychologist, and I remember this when I was in Hawaii. My clinical supervisor would always say to the interns and the postdoc students, put your mask on before helping others. You know, that's what the pilot or the flight attendant says if there's an emergency. Because if you pass out, you can't help someone else. So put your mask on before helping others. And so I think about that. And sometimes when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling frustrated. Like, why am I doing this? Why did I say that? Like, you know, I question everything. I get nervous, I get anxious. I just go for a run because I realize that I need to do something to relieve the stress. And to ground myself. And so we really have to find ways to take care of ourselves. It's frustrating. And things won't always work out the way that we expect it to work out. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Progress isn't always linear. And in the words of James Baldwin, again, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until faced. And so we have to realize that we're going to have failures for sure. I mean, it is a given. There are things that are going to happen that cause a lot of frustration. Things won't always work out the way that we expect it to work out, but we can't lose hope. In the words of Ibram X. Kendi in How to Be an Anti-Racist, he writes, once we lose hope, we are guaranteed to lose. And so we have to find ways to create hope every day. And in the spirit of agape, I just want to end by playing a song for the love of humankind, and hopefully a song that may be good for our souls. So.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Yeah, thanks. I wasn't planning on crying, so apologize. So, okay. All right.
I guess one question for me, I know you and I discussed it briefly.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of really good points here on like the science behind how we're all related
Mm-hmm.
and can view each other in that way. But is there also a moral, like a value system that you personally live by that helps you see people as brothers and sisters?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned to you that I was raised Christian, and to my mom's chagrin, I'm no longer a Christian. If I'm being honest, I'm agnostic. But there are certain values that she instilled in me and that were instilled in me by the church community. Like love is one, and I think just the message of loving your neighbor as yourself, and in giving you receive. Which, by the way, there's not to be too nerdy about it, but there is actually research that supports that people who give and care for others, they actually live longer, believe it or not. So there's something to that as well. So there's a lot of wisdom in spirituality and in religion. And that is something that has guided me. So in terms of, the moral aspect of it, of course, there's a moral aspect of it. But I mean, the bottom line too is that, I think that's why I don't do therapy, because sometimes I can't. I'm very emotional, right? As you guys know, right? and so I'd prefer not to say something or try not to empathize too much, because then I get really emotional about it. And so I think I feel other people's, I don't know how to put it, but I empathize deeply with other people. And so it feels hard to see people experiencing difficulties that could be prevented for me as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of work that we have left to do
Mm-hmm.
in society moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those concrete changes that you would like to see in coming years?
Yeah, I mentioned one of them. I mean, I can't do it by myself. And I remember talking to my wife about this, and she's like, well, if you don't even do the research, you're not going to go very far. I was like, yep, she's right. I need to do my own research and stop talking to her about it. But I mentioned that, and this is not from me, right? This is from people who have studied this a lot, from Martin Luther King, from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that people should have a guaranteed basic income. And I think that's everyone gets it, right? Everybody gets it, whether or not you're super wealthy or not, you get the guaranteed basic income. And you see a model of that right now with the COVID relief package that has been sent out to people who actually have lost their job. And I would say, well, if we had a guaranteed income for everyone, that would not be necessary. I mean, because that's a model that has been used recently. So it's not so radical if you really think about it from that perspective. And I think that's something that we should be advocating for. And so if we can join with organizations that are doing that sort of thing, I think that's a good thing.
Let's see. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Best piece of advice. I think I got a question similar to that, and I remember saying some time ago, I don't remember why I got a question from somewhere else, and it's something that my mom had said to me about, and I never really understood why she said it. Like, you should never say something behind someone's back that you can't say in front of them, right? And it's just a simple thing. But what it forces me to do is, when I have something to say and I really want to say it, I think about how I want to say it to the person. And it forces me to be courageous as well, because if I don't like something that someone is doing or something that is happening, I know sometimes when I say things on campus, I'm like, oh God, I'm going to get fired now because I shouldn't have said that. But I'm not going to say it, I'm not going to say it somewhere else if I can't say it on campus, right? If I can't say it, if I see something and I can't say something about it. And I think that was a really good piece of advice. And I never really understood the implications and the power of that particular advice. Yeah, in a way, it really forces me to be honest and to have integrity in what I'm saying. And I think about what I'm saying. If someone isn't there, I say to myself, well, if this person were here right now, could I say what I'm saying? And if I can't, and I don't say it. And so that has been helpful for me. I think that's the best piece of advice I got.
Well, you ready for the lightning round?
Yes, let's do it. Bring it on.
So just, one or two words or a small phrase, first thing that comes to mind in these questions.
Okay, all right, let's see. There's a free association.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
What food reminds you of home?
Mang, golden egg roll. Anything from there. Spicy, it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Favorite book?
Favorite book. The first thing that came to mind is How to Be an Anti-Racist, but I wouldn't say that's my favorite book. Maybe my favorite book is, Mindset by Carol Dweck. It's a very simple book, but it's not mindset, but that book is growth mindset, so it's about growth mindset, and so it's a book by Carol Dweck.
So
it's mindset, yeah.
Fixed mindset versus...
Yep, exactly. I think that was really meaningful to me because it applies to so many things. So, not rapid enough, sorry.
Morning or night person?
Both. I know that's weird. I stay up late, but I can get up early, and I shouldn't do that. I should sleep more. So I feel really guilty for even saying that. I need to sleep more. I only get about 5.5 to 6 hours of sleep, and that is certainly not enough. But I can go to bed late and get up early, and I've been trying to not rapid enough. I'm sorry again, but I should be getting at least, so students, do as I say and not as I do. Get 7 to 7.5 hours of sleep. It's good for you.
Good advice. Favorite outdoor activity?
Running, soccer. Yeah.
Who is a hero for you?
James Baldwin, for sure. He comes to mind a lot. And my mom, she's an inspiration as well. So, sorry, there are two, but I can't help it.
That's okay. 3 things that are good in your life right now.
My family. Being in conversation with you, I have to say, I don't see a lot of people around. And I said my family already, so I can't say that again. And just simple things in life, water, walking. Yeah.
Which of your personality traits has been the most useful?
I think I'm conscientious. I think I work fairly hard and I'm diligent. I'm definitely not the most talented in a number of things, but I think I work fairly hard, and that has been the most useful for me, I think.
When you have 30 minutes of free time, how do you pass the time?
Well, I read if I can, or I'm trying to avoid my kids wanting to play, or I watch a movie if I can do that. I'll run. Yeah, so it's a number of things.
What skill or craft would you like to master?
I'd love to play the piano. I really would. I feel like old dogs can't learn new trick, but I feel like if there was one that I could learn, it would be that one. Sometimes I see like John Legend playing the piano and singing. I'm like, I really wish I could do that. I wish I had learned to play the piano when I was younger. Yeah. So I wish I could do that.
Nice. In 40 years, what do you think you'll be most nostalgic about?
Playing with my kids, because sometimes I get really frustrated and I'm tired. And sometimes I think back and I'm like, I know in the future I'm going to be like, I wish they were here to just play with, and they're going to be out of the house. I think that's what it is going to be.
Well, and wrapping up, last question has to do with family. If you had one word to describe them, what would it be?
Love. Yeah, I love them dearly.